Hi Year 5 and welcome to what is normally one of our favourite lessons to do in class, and it's the lesson that's the fair feast where we think about fractions. So here's the feast that we have. I've got one pizza. I've already cut the pizza into 4 slices. I've got 1 apple. I've got 4 homemade lemon cakes, 2 cartons of orange juice and 8 cherry tomatoes. And we are going to see if we can share this feast between our 4 guests. And I have a Lego pilot there from Star Wars, Princess Leia, BB-8 and C-3PO. So they are my guests with their empty plates and their empty glasses. So we have to share the feast. And remember, it's called Fair Feast. So you will have done this before, so I want you to be thinking, all right, so what do I already know? How can I begin to share this feast? So let's begin with the pizza. So we've got 4 guests to our feast, and we've got 4 slices of pizza. I've already cut it into 4. So what fraction is that? What fraction? So I had 1 whole pizza. 1 whole pizza, and now I've cut it into 4 pieces. So have a think, what fraction have I cut the pizza into? The whole pizza is now in 4 pieces. What fraction is that? And hopefully you're saying to the screen, well, that's 1/4. So that's an easy share, isn't it? So you could share 1/4 of the pizza for each of our guests. So each guest gets 1/4 of pizza. So we're going to do that with all the food. And then I'm going to show you how I want you to write that down. And so you can work out what fraction and how you can check that the feast is indeed fair. So there are my feast guests, and they're happy because they've all got a fair piece. They've all got 1/4 of pizza. Now, obviously, they need some vegetables to go with that. So let's give them some tomatoes. Now, we had 1 whole pizza that we had to cut up, but now we've got 8 tomatoes. So do we need to cut up the tomatoes to share them between our 4 feast guests? Do we need to cut them like I cut the pizza? That was 1 whole pizza. And here, my whole is a group. I've got 8 tomatoes. So how am I going to share the 8 tomatoes? Remember, it's got to be fair. So if you're not sure, start with 1 and give 1 tomato to each person in your feast. So now each of the guests has got 1 tomato, but I've still got 4 tomatoes left. So I can give each guest 1 more tomato because that would be fair, because then they would all have 2 tomatoes each, which is 1/4 of the 8 tomatoes that we had to begin with. And then we need to do the same with the cake and the juice and the apple. So now I've shared the cake, so they've each got a cake, so they're happy now. And there's BB-8, he's got his cake. It is a grand feast for these very small Lego characters. So I've got left my juice and my 1 apple. So how are we going to share the apple? We've got 1 whole apple and we've got 4 guests. So first of all, I've simply cut the apple into half, and I've now got 2 pieces. But I've got my 4 guests waiting at the end of my table, and I've only got 2 pieces of apple. So what am I going to do next? So now I've cut each half of apple into half again, and that's given me 4 equal pieces. So my whole apple is now in 4 pieces. So I've got 4 quarters, so I can give 1/4 each to each of my guests. So now, after all that food and that lovely feast, we're obviously going to need some drink for our guests. So I've got some orange juice. I've got some orange juice. And you can see there that it's in 200 millilitres. So I've got 2 cartons of 200 millilitres. And then I've got my characters there who need their food and drink. So What am I going to need? How am I going to work out what other piece of kitchen equipment might I need to go and grab to sort out this problem? I mean, they could each have a slurp, couldn't they? But that would be sharing, wouldn't be very COVID friendly, would it? They'd be sharing their straws and having a slurp. Well, that, how could I make that fair? That wouldn't really be fair, would it? If BB-8 and C-3PO have a glug each, I'm not sure that would be fair. So what can I do? What piece of kitchen equipment can I use to make sure that this is fair? So I did go and grab a piece of equipment. I went and grabbed my jug, and in the carton there were 200 millilitres. So I have measured out 100 millilitres, and then I can put 100 millilitres in each of their glasses, and then they all have a fair feast. So here we have C-3PO with his share of the feast. So I want you to be able to write down for me, if there were 4 people, what fraction of the feast they all got. And I'll show you in a minute how I would write that down. So he's got 1/4 of the pizza, hasn't he? He's got 1 slice of pizza. He's got 1/4 of 1 apple. He's got 2 tomatoes. Remember, we didn't have to cut the tomatoes because there were 8. Because we can halve quantities as well. So we just halved the quantity of 8. He's got 1 cake, and he's got 100 millilitres of orange juice. So now that I've shared my feast, I've made a table here to say how much 4 people would have had. And at the top I've written what I had. So I had 1 pizza, 8 tomatoes, 1 apple, 4 cakes, and 400 millilitres of juice. So when I shared it between my 4 Lego people, the pizza, they got 1/4, didn't they? So you're going to write in there 1/4. They got 1/4 of the pizza. There were 8 tomatoes, and between 4 people, they got 2 each, didn't they? We didn't have to halve them or cut them. We just shared them equally as a fair feast, so they got 2. Now the apple, we had to cut that, didn't we, again into quarters, so they got 1/4 of the apple. And the cakes, well, there were 4 cakes, so they all got 1 cake each. And all together in my 2 cartons, there were 400 millilitres. So that divided by 4 meant that each character got 100 millilitres. So what I want you to do now is make your chart like I've made. Then I want you to think, what about if you had the same things, but 8 people came? What about if 12 people came? And then you could think of another number. So I want you to think of 3 other examples of different amounts of people. What would happen to the pizza if 8 people came? How much pizza would they get? If there were 8 tomatoes and 8 people, what would they get? The apple, they're definitely going to get a smaller piece of the apple. And the cakes, we didn't have to cut before, but maybe we're going to have to cut the cakes now for 8 people. And the juice, how much juice are they going to get? So I've done this based on my feast that I created at home. You may have created a different feast. If you have, put up here what you used. So maybe if you had 1 sandwich, you can put that up. Maybe you had grapes instead of tomatoes, you could put that up. You would write up there what you had. Maybe you had milk instead of juice. So you could write up there what you had. If you haven't been able to get anything and you haven't been able to actually share your feast, you just need to re-watch the video that I had, and calculate these things on 1 pizza, 8 tomatoes, 1 apple, 4 cakes, and 400 millilitres of juice. So remember, it's a fair feast, so it's got to be fair. It's not like at home where you could just maybe sneak on 1 extra tomato for 1 person. It's got to be fair, which means it's got to be equal. So draw out your table like I've done. Complete this either from my feast that I did or your feast that you made at home. Have fun.